episode of the Cozy Corner of Cinema, episode number 174, being recorded on Thursday, July 31st, 2025 at 5:38 p.m. It's a rainy day outside. It is a totally cozy day to stay inside and get some work done, to catch up on some reading, on some films, on some writing, on whatever it is, man. It's just a great opportunity to stay inside. Um, I love this kind of weather. It's important to stay vigilant in this weather when you're driving, because, some roads may be a bit more skittish than others. Just keeping an eye out on a lot of that stuff. But yeah, man, it's just great. It's kind of yeah, it's kind of great to get into that mentality of like a rainy day outside, especially, if you're like inside and, maybe you don't have like work the next day, you can sleep in, you go to bed at night, and it's just like a rainy night. There's something so cozy about that, just kind of calming to know that you're secure under the roof with, under the blankets if it's a cold night or something, or just being in bed at all. It's just so great. And just being home, being inside, getting work done, getting really kind of productive, fulfilling accomplishments completed. Well, accomplishing those to feel accomplished, um, so to speak. But yeah, just a great time, just an absolutely great time, and a great time indeed to be talking about some of these films, man. First one up we're going to talk about today is another documentary talk excuse me, talking about what I was going into last week with some of the films that were on Tubi. I watched this one, kind of referencing an earlier episode in terms of a book that I was talking about. But the documentary here is called Loose Lips: The Last Interview. But I guess the full title is Linda Lovelace: Loose Lips: The Last Interview, from 2013. This film has quite a number of interviews in it. You have, a lot of it is archival interviews. You have a lot of people involved who have since passed away, of course, like Linda Lovelace, I don't remember if Marilyn Chambers had passed in 2013 or not. I gotta look that up. Yes, she passed away in 2009. So it says 2013, but the footage looks a lot older with a lot of it, so I'm not really sure. But, footage with Eric Danville and Veronica Hart, Legs McNeil, who wrote The Other Hollywood, which is an oral biography about the rise of hardcore films in America, or adult films in America, I should say. I actually have that book and I've read it, and it's mainly just about the sort of rise of the sorry, I got distracted for a second. Exploitation. Well, it's like sexploitation stuff. Like a lot of the nudie cuties that were coming out, and then towards the '60s, you get a lot of the the sexploitation sort of films that have really kind of daring sort of posters and daring kind of like, ooh, this film was going to be really taboo and really push the limits, but then you watch and it's just a bunch of, topless, topless women doing whatever. And actually, I was talking about last week when I was talking about, oh boy, what the heck was the name of that documentary that I was so enthusiastic about? I can't remember. The actual was Skin, A History of Nudity in the Movies. I've watched so many of these documentaries, they all kind of blend together. But yeah, that era of just like the mid-'60s. Anyways, it goes past that, goes into the porno chic era. And it's not a bad book. It's one that I think has a lot of really good information. And I think my problem with the book is that it's a little unfocused. It focuses a lot of time on the John Holmes situation, on the Wonderland murders, which is a big part of it. But they spend so much time on that when it's sort of like this is just, if you're making a book on John Holmes, that's one thing. But about the actual industry, I feel like that is something to be noted, but I don't know if it's as big as just the actual history of the films itself. But anyways, it's a solid documentary, man, because the thing with Linda Lovelace is that she's an incredibly complex person in her story. Her story is pretty well known and is pretty famous at this point overall. Maybe not all of it will be famous, but yeah, I mean, Linda Lovelace, birth name Linda Borman, she gets involved with Chuck Traynor, who's an abusive boyfriend. She gets involved in the industry, originally making loops. Some ended up being infamous and kind of backfiring in the long run. Anyway, she does Deep Throat. Is really kind of the start of the porno chic era, 1972, when you have the hardcore films basically reaching a mainstream kind of commercial audience, and then from there, it is just a whole other story of her publishing a book that was essentially written by Chuck Trainer that was very much like hey, I'm this character, I just love having sex all the time, da da da, and but then she ends up coming out with the book Ordeal, which is more in line with maybe something closer to that actually happened, but there's a lot of contradictions. There's a lot of people saying that a lot of that was not true. She gets involved with the kind of feminist groups at the time who were advocating against pornography. Linda was saying she was abused, and she was, famously quoted as saying that, she said, every time you watch Deep Throat, you're watching me get raped, which is a big statement to say. But then later on, she kind of disavows the feminists. She starts doing more kind of like she does like these magazine covers, like these magazine kind of photo shoots, like with a lot of lingerie and stuff. And at the end, I mean, the documentary is talks about the last interview, but as a companion piece to this, a book I talked about a while ago was The Complete Linda Lovelace, written by Eric Danville, which I think is the most comprehensive and most fair look at the whole situation with Linda Lovelace. Because the problem with Linda Lovelace's stories, that it was changing so much, in that from what it originally was before, during the Deep Throat era, to Ordeal, which is this complete, which is a complete kind of 180 on what we've been told before, and then from before her passing, it was kind of like a mixture of, Ordeal was mostly real, you get a lot of that stuff in there, but it's always been a tricky situation, because the way that she kind of portrays certain people, a lot of the people involved with Deep Throat not agreeing with her story, or just saying that it's flat out false. You have like Harry Reams and Gerard Damiano basically saying that her version of it is just not true at all. She was, never coerced into anything. Because a big part of that as well, which is interesting, because the documentary is actually kind of framed in a way where we have the first part where we have Linda's side of it. The second part is everyone else's side of it, which seemingly by the amount of just pushback on her story, you're more inclined to believe everyone else's kind of point of view of it. But then at the third part is really the most middle ground, where Eric Danville says as well, I think there's a lot of truth in what she's saying, even if she's not completely accurate. Because a big part of it was, Deep Throat is this big, massive success. It is penetrated, no pun intended, the mainstream, and it's become a household name. It gets involved with like the Watergate scandal, and or like the code name Deep Throat, and it becomes like a big thing. But then when you have, the face of this monumentous film, which another thing I also really like about this documentary, which I really like a lot of these kind of documentaries about this period, is all the vintage sort of film and photography there. I love seeing the marquees and the big signs out front promoting Deep Throat, and I can't get enough of that stuff. I love seeing those time capsules. But what I was saying before is that, oh gosh, I lost my train of mind for a second. Eric Danville gives a fair kind of look to it all, where he says that, when she was doing these loops early on, everybody who was involved that basically contradicts her story, which is that she was never forced into it. She was a willing participant. Most infamously, kind of a dog loop that she did, or loops depending on how you go by it, because they talk about as well. A lot of the loops were either broken up or filmed a lot at once, and then were put into separate ones. So an exact count is never really. It's not going to be there. But this dog loop, and you have Eric Edwards, who was on set, happened to be involved with it, and he just totally refutes Linda's claims of just like, she says she was like forced to do it with like an M16 or like some big gun like that, and Eric Edwards says that's completely absurd. But but it's the conclusion that I kind of came to after reading the book, which is what Eric Danville says, which is that Linda was somebody who was always kind of used by these bigger kind of forces to sort of push her into a certain direction. So you have the adult, and you have like the adult industry at the time was like, okay, we have this big kind of glamorous star. This is the biggest film in the world at the time, or one of the biggest films. You know, they do Deep Throat Part 2, which is, I don't know, I can't remember if it was actually originally rated R, or if they made it as a softcore version. I know it was released with an R-rated version, but I don't know if that was the exact one. But it wasn't a hardcore film, never was. But then you have the feminist groups who are using Linda kind of to push their agenda, and then when they don't need her anymore, they kind of toss her aside. And Linda brings that up, kind of feeling like she was taken advantage of. And that's funny, you know. And when I'm talking about before last week with, you know, everybody kind of feels like they are the righteous ones in terms of, you know, film, you know, censorship or film kind of preservation, all that. But it's very interesting to kind of see both sides of this era, where you have very left leaning sort of people, like a lot of the feminists of the time, and a lot of, like, you know, people who are saying that like porn is degrading to women and all that. And then you have a lot of like the right leaning conservatives, so, you know, the people in office who want to you know, censor porn and ban it and all that. So it's just funny how, you know, everyone thinks they're in the right and they have everyone else's best intentions at heart, but ultimately they are the ones who are trying to decide for you what is good for you to see and not see. They want to be able to tell you that you should or should not, you know, basically telling you should not be allowed to watch, you know, this adult film because it's degrading to women or it's bad for the morals or anything like that. It's just like, you know, everybody kind of thinks that they are on the right side of it all the time, where, you know, between this film and the documentary that I was talking about before, it's sort of like every side of it is at fault in thinking that they have your best intentions at heart. Ultimately, you have your best intentions, and you should proceed accordingly and not listen to any kind of nonsense outside forces. But it's a solid documentary, man. I was actually, you know, it doesn't have a lot of like talk around it. I mean, it looks like a lot of archival interviews, but it's put together in a way that makes for a really fascinating, really endearing look at it all. And it's, you know, will we ever get a real kind of honest, you know, film look at Linda Lovelace? I mean, it could happen, but I don't think so. They talk a little bit about the, I guess there was a TV movie at the time, which I wasn't even familiar with, but, you know, the TV movie is kind of going strictly off Ordeal. And, I mean, they eventually did make the film Lovelace in 2012 or 2013, which I only ever saw once when it came out. And I haven't seen it since, but I remember, I think with everything that I know now about the situation, you know, it's kind of a nonsense film. It is definitely taking Ordeal at face value. For the most part, it's not doing, you know, it's not exactly Linda's story in terms of Ordeal, but it is definitely, from retrospective reviews that I've heard of it, is definitely not quite the true story that you were looking for. It's definitely an egregious amalgamation of a lot of falsities. And because in this film they talk about there was a screenplay that was being passed around about Linda's life, which I don't know if that's the same one they're referring to. I don't think so. I think that might be something else entirely, because Eric Danville, who was actually on an episode of the Alto Report, who had a lot of negative things to say about the film Lovelace, but he says that Linda would never have signed off on it. She was, I guess, very particular about certain things in the script that the film just didn't go through with. Yeah, I mean, it's one of these films I just have no interest in rewatching. I know it's not going to be a truthful sort of look into the situation. It's going to be a very kind of, you know, exaggerated and dumb sort of look at it. And, you know, it's one of the things that, I mean, as much of a fan as I am of Boogie Nights, I always did like that Tarantino criticized Boogie Nights for the portrayal of the Gerard Damiano kind of character, where, you know, if Burt Reynolds is kind of being portrayed, and I know Burt Reynolds is kind of, again, like an amalgamation of different filmmakers from that time, but I like how Tarantino said that Gerard Damiano was not that kind of person. And you know, I won't speak for the man. You know, you look up the interview yourself. But he says that, like, Paul Thomas Anderson, I think, doesn't give enough credit to Gerard Damiano, and I completely agree with that. I think Damiano was one of the strongest adult filmmakers there. He just so happened to have been the one who made the biggest, you know, adult film. You know, I've talked very positively about Memories from Miss Aggie. I did a whole Peephole Pictures of that, 'cause I think that's just such a terrific, just really exceptionally directed film. And just the range that he had as a filmmaker, I think, is so underappreciated, and just shows you the kind of skills that he had, and the improving that he had from Deep Throat, which is, you know, the filming and editing is very amateur, but, you know, you take that at face value, but then later on you see the other work that he's doing. And it's really just like, wow, this is somebody who's really learning from their mistakes and making something really exceptional. So yeah, this documentary, Loose Lips, I do recommend it, man. I really did like this one. I recommend the book for sure as a companion piece, to get into more of the specifics. But overall, I think this is maybe the most fair look at Linda, at the life of a very complicated person who did deal with a lot of trauma, did deal with an abusive boyfriend, and who did, was thrust into the spotlight, and all of a sudden it sort of like couldn't keep up with sort of the craziness around her. Other celebrities who were really a fan of hers, and then you kind of dropped her as well when things started to wane. So you feel as much frustration as you do sympathy for her. It's a complicated story, and she's a complicated person. In a way that it can't just be written off as this is exactly, everyone else is completely true, or she is completely true. I think there is there is a lot of truth in both sides of what's being told, and I think that the middle ground is ultimately for kind of you to come away with what you think, so to speak. But yeah, good stuff. It's a solid documentary. And also another solid documentary from 2003 is Hell's Highway, the true story of highway safety films, which is one that's such an interesting kind of topic that I was surprised that they even made a documentary about it. I shouldn't say surprised, I was happy because I heard about it. I was like, whoa, I want to watch that. And I won't go too much into it because I think it's more about just, kind of experiencing the film yourself and the people involved with it. But yeah, it's the history of the accident films of being safe out on the highway, not drunk driving, not recklessly driving, being more aware of it. They talk with a lot of the filmmakers at the time. And this documentary is 2003, so I think a lot of people may have passed from this. They talk with some of the actors, some of the filmmakers, and it's a really kind of interesting story in and of itself. Where I feel like this could also be a narrative. Could almost be a narrative film because it's interesting in the way that it doesn't necessarily have a concrete beginning and a concrete ending. It's more so about these things kind of fading away and not really being something that was prominent anymore. They have. Oh, I forgot what's his name from Something Weird, but he's interviewed in the documentary as well. But they talk about, getting the message across, but at the same time, putting in a lot of. Sorry, my throat's very dry. If you hear my voice squeaking, it's not that I'm going through puberty. I'm not a teenager, man. I'm just got a very dry throat. But, the message there, but then you also have a lot of like really gnarly imagery, a lot of dead bodies to kind of like really kind of beat the point home, and that's what they're talking about as well with a lot of the sort of the classroom films, the sort of sex education films. I was talking a little while ago about like Mom and Dad from 1945, I think, and you have a lot of these films from that time that are showing things that are shocking now. It's shocking more so in that you don't commonly see it, but from back then it must have been really something. And in those kind of films, you see like a childbirth, and you see like a C-section, and so at the time, it's like you look probably like a picture of it in the local library, but to actually be seeing it is like, whoa, that is just like way more than anyone else from the time would even expect. Like, I mean, it's one thing to actually be there if you're a doctor, it's one thing, but you actually in 1940 you watch it on the screen, you're like, oh my gosh, but yeah, you have a lot of like aftermaths of excuse me, of like a lot of accidents, and that can be pretty gnarly to watch. I would say that if you're someone who's very kind of sensitive to some of these real life sort of aftermath sort of photos, I'd probably to stay away from the documentary, because there is a lot of really gnarly photography in this, and I mean literal photography, like a lot of still images that are pretty grisly, and it's very disturbing. There's one moment in particular that actually was pretty shocking. I mean, and it's just like, wow, that's really kind of incredible. They put something as horrific as that in a film, even at the time, just to really beat the point home of how violent these kind of wreckages could be. And one of the guys even is getting like, he gets like emotional about what he found, and it's just like when you see it, you're like, wow, it really kind of like makes your stomach sink. But it's a good comprehensive documentary, one that I never would have even really thought of. And I love these kind of like these sort of youth sort of educational films that they would show in schools and stuff. And they have like they have like collections of it out, like of these like the sex ed films or the highway accident films or the dangers of drinking or dangers of smoking and doing drugs and all that. It's like you're in part laughing because they're so of their time. They're so the acting is kind of ridiculous, but then you have also just a time capsule of the period of just like how do we get people to really kind of be aware of being safe on the highways or wearing your seatbelt. Is you show them something that they're not gonna forget and that it can happen to anybody, and whether or not it has an effect on them, except for debate. And they mention that in the film as well. They talk about, was it effective? Was it not? It's up in the air. The Kino put this out. This is on a DVD. I watched this on Tubi, but it's a good documentary. It's a little lower budgeted, but I really did like this one. And I'm not familiar with the director, Brett Wood. It looks like he's primarily a producer of a lot of like, I think it looks like a lot of like bonus features and stuff, interviews. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, it looks like a lot of like interview sort of stuff, producer on that. But anyways, it's a good documentary. It's one that I was like, I saw pop up and I was like, whoa, that's so cool, man, that they actually made a documentary about this. So good stuff, man. Definitely got to check that out. That was, what was the name of it? I just had it up here. Hell's Highway, the true story of highway safety films. It makes you want to look those up after, and it's funny. It reminded me a lot of, in a ways, I guess, of The Killing of America, in terms of when you're watching some of these sort of accident films. They talk about in the time you've been watching this, there have been blah 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 many accidents on the road, and of course, Killing of America has that line at the end where it's like in the time you've been watching this documentary, there have been blah 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 killings or shootings in America, and The Killing of America as well is a solid documentary. It's one about the from mid 80s, I believe. I don't remember the year. But it's about the rise of violence in America at the time. Oh, the cats are running in here. Oh, don't know if you heard that or not. About the rise of violence in America at the time. Just the 80s being a really violent era. At least from the time it was being made. I think it was like 83 or 84. So the most violent year in New York on record. And it talks about the different kind of like the rising of gun violence, the rising of serial killers in the States, and it's saying something, but I think it's also a bit smarter than just saying what is inherently wrong with it, because when you're getting into the psychology of a lot of this, it's something that I remember when the Blu-ray came out. I saw a couple of reviews that it kind of made me like, I don't know, it kind of made me think like, I don't know if we even watched the same film, because there was a couple of people who were trying to say this is exactly what this film is about. It is exactly about the rise of shootings, the rise of serial killers. It's only about this, and I'm like, I think it's a bigger issue overall than just about serial killers or the television media or guns. It's something more. It's a culmination of all these things, but also the psychology of a nation, of what brings us to have these kind of primal instincts and to lash out at one another. I think it's a smarter documentary than it's often grouped into being like I've heard it more than once put into like a Mondo kind of film category, and it's really not that. I mean, for one, this was made a decade after the whole Mondo boom, for sure, and two, this is also feels just more of a documentary that just so happens to have real kind of depth footage in it, but it's not really banking on it. It's not like, come see, a bunch of murders and stuff. It's not like doing Faces of Death or, one of these kinds of, Mano Carne films. It's more so just about the rise of violence and the consequences of that. And it's a gut punch of a film, but I think it's a really good one. Because I often have problems with a lot of films that are so interested in conveying a message that it almost it doesn't even almost, it does just overtake the film itself. I did watch a film recently, and I liked the film, but I was just like, man, this film is just not interested in telling a compelling story. It is just interested in characters lecturing the audience. And it was one that, the photography was really good, and it's a mockumentary. And I was like, okay, I'm enjoying this, but then the film has to like constantly stop and like tell you like, here's the message of the film. And I'm like, man, that's kind of what I'm talking about before with certain films where it's just like, I think if the message is there and you're not even necessarily or immediately thinking about it, I think that's such a strong way of going about it. If you have to, what I call holding the audience's hand, where it's like, now, here's the message of the film, and here's the point we're trying to come across, and you're not going to miss it. There's going to be no ambiguity. There's going to be nothing that you could possibly miss, and I can't stand that. I'm like, I'm not a child, man. Because it was interesting, kind of hearing some reactions of acquaintances who I respect, opinions I respect of, Ari Aster's Eddington, where they were kind of saying the same thing. They were kind of saying the same thing, where they're like, the film is very simple and all that. And I'm like, to me, a film like that, I think, is going for more than just, this character is right, this character is wrong. That's a problem that I have with so many filmmakers who are like, these are the good characters and these are the caricatures. Whereas a film like Eddington I liked a lot more because, I mean, they were caricatures to an extent, but there was also more going on with these characters than just, I am the good guy, I am the bad guy. Ultimately, everyone's a bad guy. And it's what you do with that, which I thought was far more interesting than, maybe some other films I can name of recent memory where I'm just like, man, you're not even trying to make a film at this point. You're just trying to like lecture me. And if you want to do that, that's fine. But then like, what am I here for? Like, what are you trying to do to me, man? You can easily convey something with passion and with heart, and then also make a good film with that. I'm not saying that, there's a message here, so that's bad. That's not what I'm saying at all. But the point is, though, is that you were so distracted by what you were trying to say that you forgot to tell a compelling story. And there's a couple films that of recent memory that I can easily name off, but I don't want to just dog on any film. But anyways, yeah, Killing of America is also a solid film. So that Severin Blu-ray is very good. It also includes the Japanese cut, which I think is a little bit longer. I think there were some distinct. I mean, I think the editing is different in that for one, but I think there might have been more killing footage, and I don't know if that's true or not. But I've only seen the American version of that. But that's a good, good solid documentary as well. That is worth watching. But again, like the Highway Patrol documentaries, if you are kind of sensitive to some of that stuff, then some of the real kind of depth footage, then I'd probably steer away from it, because they're actually with the Hell's Highway and the Killing of America, you're getting like actual good information out of it. You're actually walking away with something more than if you're watching like Faces of Death or one of these kinds of shockumentaries where if that's just what you're going for, then go for it. If you just want to watch a bunch of crazy stuff like that, I'm talking about even more so than just like Faces of Death. You're getting to like the like Faces of Death kind of like realer stuff, whereas Faces of Death is mostly fake. But if the actual you're looking for in a shockumentary is just that depth footage, then go for it. That's one thing. But I think if you were looking for something a bit more and you didn't, I don't want to say did have a problem, because obviously it's distressing to see a lot of that stuff. But if you were like, okay, I actually want to gain something from my time here, then I would say that Hell's Highway and The Killing of America are both worthy of your time. So that's 3 documentaries there. I wasn't even going to talk about The Killing of America. It kind of just came up in conversation, but there we are with that. So I'm going to wrap that one up here, ending a couple minutes early, but that's okay because, I got the point across, I got the films across, and all 3 of them are worth your time, and are all easily accessible. I don't know what The Killing of America is on, but it has that Blu-ray, and I'm sure it's you can easily probably find it somewhere. But anyways, yeah, that'll do it for this episode, guys. I really appreciate you guys listening. Take care. Make sure you're working at life's goals and life's tasks. Really, just kind of working at it one day at a time, man. It is really just so important to be consistent and be on top of the task at hand, whatever that might be. So yeah, that's it, guys. You take care, and until next time, I appreciate it so much.